Hello and welcome to my talk. I'm Davies from the School of Engineering, Cardiff University, and I'm going to be talking on why should we provide choice in engineering design coursework assessment, and really to say what happened next. So a quick overview of my presentation. I'm going to define what the problem I was tackling. I'm going to mention a little bit about inclusive assessment and some pedagogy behind that. Then I'll briefly talk about the case study outcomes, student response to inclusive assessments, and some of the lessons I learned from undertaking this work. To begin with, I'll mention that this, as I said, really looks at my inclusive coursework assessment for a problem-based learning engineering design project, which I've taught for a number of years, 10 years, but in the last 2 years I've really now brought in inclusive coursework assessments into the design. So the module itself is a final year, so this is a BEng, Bachelor of Engineering degree course. It's civil engineering, although we have architectural as well as environmental. And as I said, it's problem-based learning design module. It has about 140 students, typically aged 20, 21, 22, but there is a mixture between that. They're designing a multi-storey building, and it really concentrates on sustainability and net zero principles, using materials that they haven't really come across until this year, which is mostly to do with timber, masonry, glass, alternatives to the majority of buildings in concrete and steel. The module itself has 2 submission points. One is an individual submission, which is to do with the design of the building itself, which in this case is a student learning hub. So they're given quite a specific brief, a site, and are told to create a building, but for it to be supported and designed using the materials outlined. After 6 weeks, students come together as teams and they now review their individual submissions. We do a few cooperative and collaborative tasks, but they essentially look at sustainability, aesthetics, services, net zero embodied carbon, and they typically work in about groups of 6 to 8 people. And traditionally over the many years it's a very workshop orientated, typically with a lecture keynote address really per week over 11 weeks of about an hour, 50 minutes long, followed then by 2 to 3 hours of workshop activity where students undertake their work. And the final submissions of both are typically written technical reports. What became apparent over many years was that I didn't feel I was giving all of the learners, all of my students, an equal opportunity to demonstrate their learning. And this little cartoon here, I know is a little tongue-in-cheek, but it sort of highlights the point quite clearly. What we thought as a technical report as being quite fair and open to everyone, that it would be equal, that everyone would have the same opportunity, but it's quite obvious that that isn't always the case. And so looking at inclusivity meant that wouldn't it be better that I start looking at maybe different types of assessments that suit different students in other ways, so that all students and that every student are able to show their potential, their learning within those assessments. And I guess the word around accessibility is really important here. So students can choose assessments rather than be given a format that's then suited to evidence their knowledge and their understanding. So I started by exploring what I was doing and seeing what I could do differently. The written technical report has a length, a duration, has a marking scheme, all of the normal things, and it satisfies the outcomes, the learning outcomes for that module. And I have to make sure that those learning outcomes stay the same, because I want to give students an option of not having to do a written technical report, but other ways of demonstrating, such as presentations, be it live, be it through video recordings, through storyboards, different ways really of written work, digital simulations, modelling, animation, and anything else that they may well come up with, virtual reality, augmented, and so on. So how do I make sure all of those things? Some of the stumbling blocks for me was how do I maintain these learning outcomes? How do I maintain them across all of these various different types of assessments? What's the equivalence between the formats? Do some formats mean more work for students? Is that fair? How do I make sure they're equitable across all of them, so that a student can't say that that's easier or unfair to any one person? I quickly learned that my assessment literacy was not great, but it was better than that of the students. And you'll see later some of the responses I got. And some of the support that I need to give now isn't just around a technical report, but it's around a variety of different assessment modes. So how do I address all of those things within my design? So I begin by looking at what inclusive assessments were, and like all people I would start looking at literature and looking at the university, and Cardiff University has a strategic aim where every student should have an equal opportunity to demonstrate their achievement and potential. There's an important couple of words in here: every, equal opportunity, demonstrate. So those are some key words that have to come out in our assessment. The Cardiff Inclusive Education Framework has some 3 basic areas which I'll discuss in a moment around student inclusivity: belonging, mindset, and empowering. And these are all to do with students. Well, what I found really interesting when I started looking at this is what is inclusivity, and it's quite a divisive term actually. So I found it really difficult, and people do use words in different ways, so please be careful. But I was interested in this simple cartoon of showing how people may be disadvantaged even when we think they're not disadvantaged. How sometimes we give them support frameworks and help and aid them, in some cases even more than others, where we've decided that groups actually should have more help, for example. But are all those correct? The inequality, providing equality, providing equity, but then providing justice. And that justice is a really important word, that for every student is given the same opportunity. So that sort of frames what I was trying to do. And so I ended up creating a range of diverse and customized authentic assessments for every student on my module, while satisfying the same learning outcomes. Not an easy task at all. So Cardiff Uni approach really helped me. I begin to look at the fostering a sense of belonging to all students. So really just creating that culture and celebrating diversity. And that came about from me talking, from me merely mentioning this within lectures and why I was doing it. Empowering students to fulfill their potential, regardless, no matter what their background or circumstances were. Giving them that choice was really important. And making sure that this inclusive mindset helped us to overcome these challenges of belonging and achievement, with many people thinking I shouldn't be here, or I can't do this because I did well or I did badly in it last time. All of those things we needed to address. So great pedagogical guidance is out there, and I'll just briefly mention the Universal Design for Learning, absolutely really good set of guidelines and help within that, and also the promotion of the pedagogy of care around inclusivity. So take a little bit of time looking at that. The equivalence of workload is something which isn't well defined and is not agreed upon, I'm sure, by anyone, but I've used it, and I'll show you one in a second. But this is about trying to see how various different assessment formats have impact on students. And this impact, interestingly, is around fairness as well, and how students were more concerned about things being fair for everyone than on being given the choice. And there's loads, again, of pedagogy around inclusive assessments and the benefits of them. And hopefully you'll see from the comment up here that designing assessment methods so that students have an equal opportunity to demonstrate their learning against the same standards. And that's important, that it's the same standards. This is not making things easier. This is making things accessible. So my case study, well, lots of things happened, but I began by looking at trying to create these inclusive assessments and assignments. So the transparency, I wanted students to be quite upfront with what I was doing, knowing the learning outcomes, knowing my marking schemes, criteria, and how they apply to all of the assessment types, or all those I could think of. And that was quite difficult because I couldn't think of everything the student might come up with, but I came up with strategies that helped. Workload equivalence was one of those, and I spent a little bit of time looking on our own website and from other sources about different types of assessments, different word count equivalents that they have, the notional amount of hours that it would take a student to achieve that, and the equivalent credits in terms of module credits that they relate to. So we can understand then the equivalence between everything. The word count equivalent here was really useful because it helped, but the duration was really key as well. You know, we always spend time thinking about, well, what's a written essay against an individual presentation, or a recorded presentation, or a group presentation, or doing some augmented reality, or all of these things became a little more difficult, but I had to start somewhere. And the diverse formats were so varied. The written technical report remained, but videos recorded was probably my first main alternative, but in the second year I allowed them to do anything that they particularly wanted, from live presentations, creating models, digital models, animation, and combinations therein of all of this following student suggestions. So quite an in-depth amount of work really to try and do this, to try and do it properly, that is. So, student responses. Well, these come from over the last 2 years, and I must say that when I did this to begin with, I introduced to students this concept of flexible assessment formats, and I was expecting probably some hand clapping, maybe some cheering, that at last somebody had given them this chance. But what I had in reality was complete silence and concern. And what most students started to tell me was, no, just tell me what to do. Don't give me this choice. And I found actually that in many students this uncertainty, this fear and confusion came out. That this was totally new to them, but it was causing anxiety, the fact I'd given them choice. But over some time and perseverance and a few weeks of support and reassurance, students began to accept what I was talking about, the need for looking at inclusivity and how I was going to deal with it, and that this wasn't just me being a dictator, but this was allowing students to co-collaborate things with me. So student uptake, actually at the end of the day, how many students actually chose inclusive assessments? Well, in the first year I expected it to be higher than what it actually was, but 18% of the students chose to do pre-recorded videos, which is the only alternative I really gave them in that year. The second year I gave them few more options, and 25% of the cohort, so that's 25% of 140 students chose different means, not the traditional written report, which was absolutely great. Concerns from staff when I keep talking about this was, wow, well, if you're making it easier, which I'm not, by the way, what's happened to your module results? Well, actually, they remained about static. 63 to 64% on average across both of those years, and actually even across previous years it's only fluctuated by a couple of percent up and down, so it's not really impacting the marks, although it is impacting the students' quality of learning and their learning environment, and that's really highlighted by the student survey feedback. The comments, these are just a few, but it's just all positive, really, saying about the assignment has allowed me to and encouraged me creatively in developing my skills, more freedom, loved the coursework scenario, which meant the inclusive part, liked having choice, and liked being able to negotiate, really, and the feeling I had across the whole of the cohort, even those, still 75% of them this year still chose the written technical report. They just felt liberated that this barrier had gone, which had never been felt to me as being a barrier to their achievement. So some really interesting feedback from students. I showed you that the module scores didn't change in terms of the average results, but the module enhancements, well, they did, and the module enhancements increased from a range over the previous 5, 6, 7 years from just over 4, and they were up to about 4.59, 4.58, and this year, with some more help and determination, they actually achieved a 5 and a 4.83 for overall performance and for support of my assessment. So really pleased with that. Lessons learnt? Well, I think early engagement with students. Talk to them. Tell them what you're going to try and do and why you're trying to help and improve their situation. Submission formats are not about just providing different types. This wasn't about coming up with a pick and mix. This was thinking about the students from all backgrounds, culturally, socially, age. All of these things actually created a lot more formats than I initially expected. Let students suggest submission formats, because we certainly don't know all of the formats that they want. But then negotiate on the equivalents. Create these with them. Guidance is available on the creation of these assignments, but currently there's not much substance or detail in them. And for problem-based learning, especially in engineering coursework assignments, there are very specific learning outcomes that we need to achieve. So here's a list of bibliography, and I'd just like to say at the end a big diolch, thank you to you for listening, and I hope that you found my experiences on providing inclusive assessments to students of some interest to you. If I was to tell you anything, try it. They'll be thankful that you've done it. Thank you. Bye-bye.